Good afternoon and welcome to the Chamber of Commerce, Southern New Jersey's virtual Environment Committee meeting. My name is Christina Renna and I am President and CEO of the Chamber. Thank you all who have tuned in to join us this afternoon. Today we are so honored to feature Senator Bob Smith, Chair of the Senate Environment and Energy Committee. We'll be hearing from him momentarily, but I did want to thank him in advance for joining us today. As always, I would like to begin today's program by thanking our sponsors, starting with Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, who is the headline sponsor of the Chamber's Government Action Series. Additionally, I would like to recognize our Environment Committee sponsors, ELEC 825, New Jersey American Water, Mango Gold Catcher and Fox, LLP, Paulsboro Refining Company, and PSEG Nuclear, LLC. It is the support and commitment of these companies that enable us to continue to bring you our quality programming as we continue to battle through this very tumultuous year. So thank you all very much for that. A few housekeeping items before we begin. In a minute, I'm going to introduce our Environment Committee Chair, Bruce Ketcher, Esquire, who's partner at Mango Gold Catcher and Fox LLP, and then I'll turn the floor over to Bruce. He will then introduce Senator Bob Smith, after which time we will hear the senator speak and kind of talk on anything he wants, any hot topics he has on top of his mind today. Once he concludes those opening remarks, we will have a Q&A session with him. Several of you sent in questions in advance. We did receive them. I know our chair, Bruce Ketcher, probably has some questions as well, but at the bottom of your screen is that chat function. It's open right now. I encourage you to ask any questions you may have for the senator. In that chat function, Bruce and I both will be keeping an eye on it, and Bruce will be asking the senator as many as possible, but we will be concluding absolutely no later than 2:30 p.m. And just for those regular Environment Committee attendees, I do want you to know that we will not be reviewing a legislative and regulatory update today, but we will be doing so at our final Environment Committee meeting of the year, which takes place December 1st. So if you're looking for that, make sure you register for our meeting on December 1st. With those housekeeping items out of the way, I'm going to turn the floor over to our chair of our Environment Committee, Bruce Ketcher of Mango Gold Catcher and Fox. A co-founder of the firm and its first managing partner, Bruce has over 40 years of experience in the practice of environmental law. His practice is concentrated primarily in New Jersey, and he also continues to counsel Pennsylvania clients. Bruce's practice includes all of the key New Jersey and federal environmental regulatory programs. However, he gains the most satisfaction from assisting his industrial and real estate clients to solve complex regulatory issues under a web of state and federal water, solid waste, and site remediation laws. But most importantly, Bruce is the long-serving chair of our Environment Committee, and we thank you so much, of course, Bruce, for your dedication to us and also for being with us today. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to you. Senator Smith, again, thank you so much for being with us, and the program is now yours.
Thank you very much, Christina. I am thrilled that you all have been able to join us today for what I consider a very special meeting. We are going to jump right into our program. So please allow me to introduce today's guest speaker, Senator Bob Smith. Senator Smith was elected to the Senate in 2001 and has been reelected 5 times. He also served in the Assembly from 1986 to 2002 and has been the longtime chair of the Senate Environment Committee. Senate Environment and Energy Committee. Both components equally as important. During his tenure in the legislature, Senator Smith sponsored many influential pieces of environmental legislation, including legislation reforming the Garden State Open Space Acquisition Program to focus on water resource protection, measures focused on the preservation of the highlands, providing a continued source of revenue for New Jersey parks, setting in place measures to promote water quality in the Barnegat Bay, establishing New Jersey's legislative framework to address climate change, and transforming the process for the remediation of contaminated sites through the licensed site remediation program. He also sponsored 2 constitutional amendments approved by the voters, one to provide stable funding for open space, farmland, and historic preservation, and a second to dedicate natural resource damage litigation awards to restore the environment. As you can tell, the senator has been very busy throughout his career and has really helped to bring into existence a number of extremely important environmental and energy programs. We are honored to have the senator with us here today. Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And thanks to the Southern New Jersey Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if you realize it, but we've had a hard time getting together. You have invited me many times, but it took the virus to really get this done because we are now meeting remotely. And, I know you think of Central New Jersey as North Jersey, but we really do think of South Jersey as really South Jersey. So it's all, distance has always been the problem. There's no longer a problem due to all the technical advances related to the virus and people getting together and talking. So it's great to finally be with the Southern Jersey Chamber of Commerce. And I do appreciate over the years the fact that the Chamber of Commerce has been very willing and very active in providing input on our legislation. Any of this stuff is very complex and it involves a lot of people and industries, and it affects things in ways that it's hard to ever to anticipate. And the Southern Jersey Chamber of Commerce has always been up there, making sure that your point of view and the point of view of your members were well represented. So thanks to you guys and gals for doing that. Bruce mentioned some of the things we're involved with. Let me, so I don't eat up your time, because I know you have questions to ask, let me just mention what's hot right now. First, I think everybody on the call probably is aware of the fact that Governor Murphy signed the single-use plastic bag ban bill, which will give us 1.5 years to transition into reusable bags at the supermarket and in other places, and will remove styrofoam containers and allow plastic straws only on demand in restaurants. So, depending on what ox you are and whether you're getting gored or not, it is true that our lifestyle is going to change in 18 months. And the legislation also provides $500,000 a year to train people, educate them about the change in lifestyle, and also to provide free reusable bags. So that happened in the last month, and that's after 6-7 years of work, but it's done. What's really hot right now, and I'm hoping it'll be on the next Environment Committee meeting, which I think is December the 10th, is recycled content. And you may or may not be aware, it's December 10th. You may or may not be aware that recycling in New Jersey is in big trouble. And it's in big trouble because, number one, because we do it so well and we generate so much recycled materials that the market for it has dropped terribly. Also, too, that China and other countries have prohibited us sending our, quote, recyclables to them. And, we really have to take care of our own recycled materials. And one of the ways you do that is you create markets. And, I've gone to webinars where, for example, some of the plastics recyclers are there. They'll take any plastic, they'll take it clean or dirty, and they will convert it into either new plastic products or into a hydrocarbon fuel, and it will give value to that waste. What we've done since the recycling markets have changed is we're now, what used to be at least a neutral item in a municipal budget is now costing a bunch of money because it's going into tipping fees to dump these materials into landfills, which eats up landfill space, terrible use of these resources. So the recycled content bill says for glass, you need this percentage of reused glass. For paper, we need this percentage of paper. For plastics, depending on the product, what percentage of recycled material has to be in it. And this will dramatically impact the recycling markets, hopefully put some value on these materials, and hopefully get New Jersey recycling back up to the place that it needs to be. We also recently did a food waste bill, which is hopefully going to help reduce the volume of food waste in landfills. We Americans and New Jerseyans are terribly wasteful. We waste about at least half of our food goes into the garbage. And by the way, then you get a double shot because it ends up in a landfill generating methane, which is a global climate changing gas, 20 times the impact of carbon dioxide. So we really need to clean up the food waste area of our economy. And I'm hoping the recent legislation, which was a bugger to get through the legislature, will help to do that. We're going to have on the December 10th bill a charging infrastructure bill. And what it's going to do is to take away the hurdles at the local level to installing charging structure. And I'm sure all your Chamber of Commerce members have gone through the local land use process. Ain't easy. It's costly. I'm a land use lawyer by trade. And yeah, I've been in the battlefields for many, many years. And, you know, if we really want to get our EV effort really going, we have to get charging infrastructure installed around the state so that people don't have range anxiety. That is that they go out in their car today and they go 50 or 80 miles down the turnpike and they're afraid they can't get back. So we need to get this charging infrastructure installed. And by the way, roughly 4 months ago, Governor signed my EV bill, which provides $30 million a year for the next 10 years to incentivize car buyers to buy an EV. And so far this year, this is the first year we're doing it. About half of that money has already been awarded. And we are trying very hard to get 300,000 EVs on the road in a very short period of time. Those incentives help. It also helps that when you use electricity, you're going to pay half the money for the same distance as fossil fuels. But they are, you know, depending on what kind of an EV you buy, there's a price to pay until these things are being mass produced in great numbers. But we have the EV bill done, at least for the moment. We're also doing grid scale and dual solar, grid scale solar and dual use solar. One of the problems with the governor's energy master plan is there's no way in the world the state is going to meet the renewable energy goals in that plan, even with yesterday's announcement that the BPU is on the verge of awarding contracts for 7,500 megs of offshore wind. And by the way, that's going to be very good for South Jersey. And I'm hoping that as a result of our effort in the wind area that we're going to see some wind manufacturing in South Jersey. You know, there's some unique characteristics of the ports down there that make it a very viable location for wind component manufacturing. And the governor is really committed to wind energy, which is good. So anyway, the grid scale solar, to finish that thought and to, you know, get to questions so you can ask them some questions. One of the mistakes, and we make mistakes every day, but one of the mistakes back in the 2000 teens, we let Governor Christie bully us on the location of solar. You may remember that the solar market was diving and we needed to accelerate the renewable portfolio standards so we could keep the industry alive. Well, his quid pro quo was to limit where solar could go, such that you're talking about on top of landfills, brownfields, or commercial warehouse rooftops. And the problem is we're never going to get there. It's not happening. And if you want to do grids, if you want to really meet the goals in terms of renewables, you're going to have to open up more of New Jersey to grid scale solar. And of course, the problem is, where do you go? And, you know, one of the obvious places would be farmland, but there is a battle between enviros, farmers, and solar developers about what farmland is appropriate. Marginal, you know, farms with good soil. And of course, some would argue that when you put a solar facility on even a farm with good soil, you're not consuming the land. The solar panels are not forever. They're not like a 10-story building in Jersey City that's going to be there for 100 years or 200 years. You know, they can easily go back to farming, high grade farming. And as a matter of fact, one of the ways in which the colonists refertilized their farm fields was to let them lay fallow for a number of years. Dual use solar, different approach. Here, you're going to keep farming going on the land, going to build the panels higher up and at a lower density. And now you can do cattle grazing, hay, berries, you know, a whole bunch of farm activities. You're doing it in Massachusetts, seems to be very successful. We're looking at it for New Jersey. So that is some of the really interesting things we're doing. And of course, what I'm not talking about in any great detail, unless you ask me a question, is the end of the world. Namely that we're frying. And, you know, if you own property on the coast, my advice would be to sell it, which is the discussion I have with my wife every weekend. We have a very nice summer home in La Valette, and it concerns me. You know, the global climate change thing is really existential, but you know, you got to be a believer and you want to hear about it. If you want to hear about it, just ask me the question. So with that, Bruce, I'm going to stop so I don't eat up all the time.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you very much, Senator. It took me a second to figure out how to get back
in
online.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of questions.
Sure.
So let me just dive right in. I'm going to jump back and forth between a couple of questions that were submitted prior to the program, and then I'm going to go through the questions that I see popping up in the chat. Someone asked whether you would consider hearings, I guess, leading to legislation on microgrid development and issues of any needed regulatory reform around this topic.
Yes. I would consider, for sure. You know, listen, the microgrids have a lot of potential for strengthening the overall grid, but also providing for unique energy situations like hospitals, for example. And by the way, you want to hear a real interesting one? One that was whispered in my ear yesterday is, what about weed? Do you know that pot requires a huge amount of electricity? The growing facilities have high density lighting, very intense, fans to keep the area cool. Their energy demand is outrageous. So concept for microgrid, maybe also something for energy efficiency. But if you want to make it topical, I have a feeling that the weed industry is going to be in the microgrid business as well.
Great. You touched a bit upon wind energy as being something that's moving forward. Do you have any observations in terms of how you think that's going, and in terms of implementation of the legislation that was enacted to move that forward?
So yesterday, the Board of Public Utilities issued an order, and the order basically moved ahead the acquisition of 7,500 megs of offshore wind, I think being done by Ørsted. What the order, and it's available online, so everybody should go look at it if you're interested in the topic. But what it did was to make peace with PJM. Remember, we're a state, all right, and we're part of what's called an ISO, which means that we participate with other states to try and get the lowest cost energy as the energy that our ratepayers consume in the state of New Jersey. And what they do is they look at all the sources in all of these 10 or 11 states, and the ISO picks the winner, picks who's providing the cheapest energy at any given moment. And then that becomes the actual energy that's consumed. Yeah, and sometimes you're paying utilities, or better to not say utilities, generators, to be on standby if they ever need to up the energy, et cetera. It's a very, very complicated system. But what the order that the BPU issued yesterday did was to put some rationality to that. And they now appear to have a working agreement with PJM. All right. Remember, we have a big issue. Not just we, everybody in the country. FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has been very, very pro fossil fuel over the years, especially the last 4. And as a result, states have been inhibited in providing any incentives for renewables. All right, because the theory is you have to go for the lowest price energy at any given moment. So what the order did yesterday was to come to some agreement with PJM how this could be handled. And that's a huge step forward for the wind industry, at least offshore wind. It's not a big step forward for the wind out in the West, where, you know, the corn is as high as an elephant's eye. Well, they have great wind resources out there, but you can't get it back to the East Coast because all the individual states have set up barriers to that happening. So in any case, take a look at the order yesterday, and it really moves the ball way ahead on wind energy. So I'm much more optimistic that we're going to get these 7,500 megs in my lifetime. Don't know how long that's going to be, but what I'm saying is I think you're going to see construction maybe as early as the end of next year, and then really getting off the ground with wind. But your question is, am I satisfied? No. You know, we're not doing it. We're not doing this fast enough. You know, we're in South Jersey, you know, make sure your policy's big. We are going to get crushed again with some more hurricanes. Maybe we will get a few forest fires. If there's any climate deniers out there, shame on you, because, you know, the world is coming to an end. It's really bad. Whether you believe it or not, it's really, really bad. I'm an upper. I know that. I you know, really, you don't want to have this speech unless you have a scotch and soda in your hands.
No, I think you said what you said is very true, and hopefully we will now have an administration in Washington that agrees with that.
Absolutely.
One question that I had when you talked about the legislation that's under consideration to generate more recycling markets. Is there some tension between that concept and the new environmental justice legislation, which seems to, among the industries that it focuses in on in terms of subjecting them to the requirements of the EJ legislation, is the recycling industry. If your legislation does what it's intended to do, presumably that will result in the expansion of recycling markets and the need for more recycling activity to take place, a lot of which may be subject to the requirements of the environmental justice law. Now, that's not to say that these facilities won't be able to expand or won't be able to site new facilities, but it seems to me that there certainly is a potential for there to be some tension there between those two concepts.
So yesterday I attended a Spotlight New Jersey remote program like this. And the topic was the EJ law. And they had representatives from all segments of society. And the title of the seminar was How the New EJ Law Will Work. So I listened to it. Program's over. I still have no idea how it's going to work. All right. I think it's the DEP has been given an almost impossible task because, quite frankly, I think they're still even trying to figure out what areas are covered under the law. And they're kind of like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. On the one hand, they're supposed to be providing for the safety of nuclear power. On the other hand, they're supposed to be promoting it. So if you're the DEP, who is the chief administrator of the law, you're supposed to be trying to clean up the environment, and recycling is one of the tools to do that. You know, reducing what's going into landfills, reducing what's going into the ocean. But at the same time, you're supposed to be making sure that environmentally burdened communities are not getting more of a burden. So it's early in the game to try and figure out what's going to happen. But let me go back to the one webinar, and that's one of the great things about this virus. There's nothing great about it except you get a chance to go to a lot of places and do a lot of things and hear from people that you might never have heard from. So I attended this plastics recycling webinar. I think it was put on by the Chemical Industry Council. And they had half a dozen top-notch plastics recycling operators, facility operators, some with 4 and 5 and 6 or more facilities, others, but they all made the same point. They're not going to any state that has a huge regulatory burden to get into the state. So with regard to New Jersey, they're going to be in Pennsylvania. And you're going to put all this and you won't have the recycling facility probably in New Jersey for good or evil. I mean, there's the environmental justice thematic is correct. You know, you have had communities who have been crushed by environmental contamination, and that shouldn't be allowed to happen. But what capitalism does, it ultimately says is go the easiest route and most profitable route possible. So why should you fight to set up a plastics recycling facility in New Jersey if you can do it in Pennsylvania in 2 weeks, right? And that's an exaggeration. I haven't gone through the regulatory process in Pennsylvania, but a number of these facilities were located there. So my guess is what the EJ law will do is steer some facilities away from New Jersey. And then the other thing is you're going to come to huge walls. And for example, gravity becomes an issue. You know, you want to do sewage treatment, sewage has to go gravity. You don't do force main pumps from low areas and send sewage to high areas. A lot of our larger cities that are going to be EJ communities have sewage treatment plants. And the sewage treatment plants are usually at the mouth of the river or not that far up. Gravity and the capital costs to do other stuff is going to be enormous. You know, some of the siting that has happened has not necessarily been a conscious effort to expose populations to harm. Some of it is things like gravity, you know, that affect siting decisions. So it's going to be the commissioner of the DEP, I used to call it the second toughest job in state government. It's going to be the toughest job in state government, even tougher than the governor. Because no matter what you do, you're going to be wrong.
I share your observations on that seminar yesterday. I attended that as well. And it seemed like the DEP representatives were intent on trying to make everybody feel good and that there wasn't been a problem for either the EJ communities or business, but it was impossible to see how that could be the result.
Yep.
Okay, let me move on. I know I'd like to move on to a question about site remediation, which I know is a subject near and dear to your heart as
You
a
realize
result of,
I'm your father.
pardon me,
I'm your father.
my father.
You said you were an LSRP, right? Or not?
No, I said, let's move on to site remediation. I know that's a subject
Oh,
that's near and dear to your heart.
I thought in the introduction, Christina said you were an LSRP. And so I'm wrong on that. So anyway, Sarah 1 and Sarah 2 are both my piece of legislation.
Right.
And I would love to say they came out of my brilliant brain, but it wasn't at all. And this is now 12 years ago, we looked at the way in which sites in New Jersey were being cleaned up, and they were being cleaned up horribly. And the reason they were being cleaned up horribly was that the paradigm in New Jersey was command and control. Before you could open the front door, you had to talk to the DEP to see how wide the door you should open, etc. It was command and control, and that wasn't working. We looked to see if somebody had a better model, and the better model was the state of Massachusetts. And in the state of Massachusetts, which has had this program since 1992, they took their backlog of about 25,000 cases and they're at zero. And the reason they're at zero is that in those from 1992 to 2010, in that 18-year period, they had cleaned up the backlog with the LSRP program. And for those people in your audience who are not technically or, in this business, what the law does is set up a new class of person, an LSRP, a licensed site remediation professional who can only get that license if they've had so many years of experience in doing remediation, if they pass tests. And by the way, if they screw up, their license at risk. And what they get the ability to do is to evaluate a site, prepare what's called a remedial action work plan, and then to execute it, to oversee the cleanup of a site. When it's done, they get to evaluate the site. And if it's clean, they issue what's called an RAO, a remedial action outcome. It used to be an NFA, a no further action letter, but it's now an RAO. And what it did was to outsource the cleanup. Before it was command and control where the DEP had to do everything, make every decision. And now the LSRP does that, and they're audited. DEP will audit a certain percentage, and if somebody screwed up, they'll cite them. They'll go after them, and they'll go after their license. So the program has, at this point in time, in 2020, it's cleaned up over 14,000 sites in New Jersey, which is a great accomplishment. You take formerly dirty sites and you put them back on the economic rolls for development and for commerce and industry and so on. So I think it's a great bill, great legislation.
I would agree too. While it's certainly not perfect, it certainly has done a wonderful job in moving these sites along through the process. The question that somebody posed was, there is a provision in the law, and this is somewhat of a controversial issue these days, that appears to exempt LSRPs from having to report discharges when conducting due diligence, as distinguished from when they're just can do diligence in connection with property acquisitions and sales, as opposed to actually getting involved in a remediation program for that site. Apparently, there is some disagreement within DEP as to whether or not that really does exempt LSRPs from having to report discharges if they discover them in connection with due diligence. The questioner asks whether you have any thoughts on that as to how that provision ought to be interpreted.
Yeah, DEP's right. LSRPs have been made into the golden warriors of cleanup. And you can't have them having split responsibilities. If they're on a site and they're evaluating a site, doing whatever on a site, and they see an active discharge, they have to report it to the DEP. I don't think that's I don't think that's an element of interpretation in the law. All right. And that was one of the big issues that we talked about in Sarah too, because you don't want conflicting loyalties. So the way in which most private landowners handle this is they hire a non-LSRP to evaluate the site. And they can contract with the non-LSRP to just do an evaluation, and who are not under necessarily the affirmative obligation to spill their guts to the DEP. So I think and by the way, right now, I think that's the way it should be. I mean, we had a big discussion about it, and we made in Sarah too, we cleaned up or tweaked some things that needed to be tweaked, but some basic things we did not change, like what are the responsibilities of an LSRP. Also, another big issue was having probability-based standards, and that didn't fly either. And the people who, we had all the stakeholders in the room, it was like 35 people with the DEP, and, we had like 2 or 3 hour sessions to hash all these issues out. So they got a thorough vetting, and it's like anything else in the law. See me in 10 years. I hope I'm around. See me in 10 years, and we'll take a look and see how things are working and whether there's a need for change. But the LSRP program at Sarah has been, I think, fantastic.
Keeping in the same general subject area, I know you had put together a task force on natural resource damages to try to come up with some kind of consensus approach to that.
Total failure.
Are you going to take that any further in terms of any legislation that you may?
Well, I'll is there any press in the room?
Not that I'm aware.
I'm joking, but we've tried something different than a lot of other committees in the legislature. We will, especially for tough issues, we'll put together a task force and put everybody, all different points of view together, and say, come back with me with recommendations on this topic. Tell me the ones you can all agree on, and then tell me the ones you can't agree on and why you can't agree on them. So we did it with beach access. All right. You remember we're having a lot of legal problems with that, with our Supreme Court and with the DEP, and what really is the king's right to regulate shorelines and so on, and shore issues. But we did that with beach access. They went away for 6 months. They had 60 people on this task force, and they came back with a list of things they could all agree on, and then the things they couldn't agree on and why. So what we did was then do the bill that they could all agree on, which, by the way, when we did it, some said, well, we don't really agree with everything, but we did get it done. Beach access became I think a very good step forward on that issue, although we got to go to beach access too on the complicated issues. But that being said, on NRDs, put everybody in the room, met for months. They came back to me, so we can't agree on anything. Nothing. So I meet and talk to the commissioner of the DEP and the Board of Public Utilities president to see where they are and how we can help them, et cetera, et cetera. So when we're talking about the agenda from now until the end of the session, I brought up the question of NRDs, and the leaders at the DEP said, you know what? We've come to the conclusion that we're better off without them. And I said, why is that? And I think part of it may be who our Attorney General is. I don't know about you, but I'm really impressed with him. When he called to solicit support, I sit on the Judiciary Committee, when he called to solicit support and asking for a positive vote, this is at the beginning of the governor's term, he said, I want to be a good Attorney General. What do you think we should be doing? I said, we haven't had any environmental law enforcement in 8 years, the prior 8 years. I said, you would be doing this state a big favor if you would look into those areas where we need to be active again. Also on the NRD thing, I asked him about that as well, because remember, as he was coming in, the whole Exxon thing was going out, where the state had sued for $9 billion in natural resource damages, and they settled on the courthouse steps for 250 million, which was why I put in the constitutional amendment to require that whatever NRDs you get have to be dedicated for environmental purposes. All right. So, and which passed 2-1, passed overwhelmingly. But the Attorney General said, I'll look into it. He's been the most aggressive Attorney General I've seen in 30 years. He's going after stinkers and calling them out for the contamination. You got a big problem down in South Jersey with the PFAS stuff, which is getting all over the place. And I saw in one recent release that he's going after what he believes to be the main source of it down there, company. Name's not coming to mind right at the moment, but
Solvay.
yeah. But the bottom line is he's got guts, and he's trying to do the right thing. And the comment back is we are better off with flexibility on that issue. So you'll notice in this, I have not brought that up this year because the feedback I'm starting to get is we're better off using the federal model, which has more flexibility. We're doing better for the state under that regime. So, unless I hear from the Attorney General or the DEP commissioners that we really have to have the NRDs, there's so many other things that have to be done. I got plenty on my plate.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that gives DEP more flexibility. At the same time, it generates tremendous uncertainty for the regulated community, and that's been a big problem. You mentioned in response to the last question, the public access legislation. One of our questioners asked whether you would had any observations on DEP's implementation of the public access legislation.
A little aggressive. That's the 3-word summary. And they did come in to see me and say, listen, this is the way we're going. I said, I think you might be stretching that line just a little bit. But, go through the process, get the public input and see where it all ends up. But do know that if you go crazy, I'll have to revisit and try to put balance into it. Now, you may remember the beach access one was not crazy. You had things like local shore communities have to have a beach access plan in their 10-year master plan. What's radical about that? It said that you don't have to have beach access for national defense facilities. What's crazy about that? It also said you don't have to have beach access in areas where you have threatened and endangered species. Well, that makes total sense. Why would you want people, trudging through turtle nests or whatever? And there was 1 or 2 others, but I forget them. That's what happens when you get more mature. But they were very common sense kind of things. And even with that, it was a struggle. This was the stuff everybody agreed with, and it was still a struggle. In fact, I think I saw one of your guys' question. It was Mike. Oh God, he was the co-chair of the task force.
Mike Eggington?
Yeah.
That was Mike's question.
By the way, he should get great credit for it. We had 4 co-chairs, and they did a magnificent job in trying to distill it down to what we could all agree with.
I had a question that was submitted prior to the today about DEP's protecting against climate change or climate threats pact initiative. I always forget what that acronym stands for. It's kind of an oddball one, but it's certainly a big initiative of the department. I don't know how closely you've been following it, but the questioner asked whether you anticipated any legislation being required to implement any of that initiative.
Not yet. We do have some already. You talked earlier about our efforts to preserve open space, uh, farmland, historic, and also Blue Acres. And from Storm Sandy, we had a bunch of money to buy flood impacted properties. That's, by the way, that's the highest priority in terms of our acquisitions of open space. We're supposed to be protecting areas that can flood and also any areas that affect water supplies. So one of those best kept secrets, but we actually have a priority ranking for that acquisition. So the horrible answer, this is the one you should have the scotch and soda for. The horrible answer is, yeah, there's going to be legislation. It's going to come the next time we're slapped. You know, Sandy is not an out of the normal thing. You know, this year it was the Gulf. The Gulf got destroyed over and over and over again. That's coming to New Jersey. We're going to have more intense and more frequent hurricanes, and they're going to come up that coast and they're going to rip us to shreds. And at some point, the people of New Jersey are going to say, I need you to do something. And what the problem with, well, it's not the problem. I think the strategic approach of the DEP plan was to say, right now in 2020, our job is to warn everybody, to let them know that there's a real good chance that their property is going to be underwater, that their city is going to be underwater, that there's going to be massive damage, that, you know, we're going down a chute here that's not really good. It's all part of that global climate change fear mongering that I did earlier in this program, because you should be afraid. All right. So what they're doing is they're warning you. So nobody can say they didn't do their job and warn you, but they're not willing to, or at least not yet, are they willing to say, okay, we're moving the floodplain 30 miles inland. In other words, you can't build anymore. All right. And the reason that I think they're not saying we need more laws or more restrictions is that you get yourself into a situation called inverse condemnation. And by the way, with this Supreme Court, oh my God, what that would mean. All right. So, you know, you can warn people and then you're going to say, okay, everybody's an adult. You know that this property has real problems in terms of the future, and you should be smart enough not to buy it, etc. Or we, the state of New Jersey, should be smart enough to acquire it, however you want to look at it. But I see these awesome and awful events coming that will cause people in the state to say, hey, legislature, do something about it, whether it's acquisition of property or requiring the DEP to extend the floodplains or whatever. So the day is coming. All right. Right now, it's let's be nice to each other and let's just warn you about the problem. But it's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah, and anyone that's following that PACT initiative, I would certainly agree with those observations, and we should be seeing some proposed regulations, I think, by the end of first quarter of 2021. So that's something that certainly at our committee we're going to keep an eye out on. Another question that was submitted in advance. Why isn't landfill methane gas to energy given the same deference and incentives as other alternative energy sources?
Because it's a lie. The landfills leak like a sieve. They leak like a sieve. So, and that one came from the Ocean County guys. All right, the Ocean County landfill.
Cumberland County.
Yeah, but in any case, at the time, you know, way back when, it maybe helped a little bit, but you get this tremendous leaking factor. Methane it has 20 times plus the impact of carbon dioxide. So when you waste food, and by the way, it's you that's the problem. You, every one of us, you know, Pogo, I've met the enemy and they are us. It's when you waste food that goes into a landfill, it ferments, it decays, anaerobic decay, and it produces methane gas. Now, the landfills will argue we've put in this gas collection system, and some of them have, and some of them are relatively good. but they all leak like sieves. The right thing to do is to have food waste collected, put into a digester, and 100% of the methane gas being used for energy production. That's called renewable natural gas, which is kind of an interesting term for it. But what you're doing is not allowing it to go into the atmosphere as methane. So it's a much better, much more efficient way to do business. That was the problem with the food waste bill. That was a 21 vote bill. You know what a 21 vote bill is? That's called the skin of your teeth times 10. That's a tough way to get a bill passed. And by the way, I had the environmental justice people also concerned about it, because they're saying these food waste digesters are going to be in our areas. They're going to increase our air pollution. So you can see how complicated and multi-layered these issues are. But that's the reason for the methane. Methane is like the third largest source of climate change gases in the world.
Right, and I assume the same issue comes up with composting facilities too, in terms of where they're located.
I'm sure it does. You know the most famous composting facility in the world? Maplewood. Maplewood Township has been doing leaf composting since the 19 teens. And if you go up to Maplewood, it's just a gorgeous suburban community, because they offer baskets of compost to the residents for free, or for a very, like $1 a basket or whatever. And that's why you see all those residential gardens that are so nice. The thing that gets tough on composting is leaf composting. I'm sorry, grass composting. Grass composting really smells. All right, leaf composting, not so much, as long as you aerate them periodically, turn them over.
Okay, we have just a couple more questions. They're very energy oriented.
Good.
In December 2019, Atlantic City Electric proposed new programs and services in a filing at BPU, including off-peak rates for at-home charging. I assume they mean charging of electric vehicles.
Yep.
Do you have any comment on that proposal?
Well, not on their specific proposal, but you have, again, a whole bunch of problems that are interrelated with it. One of the things is that we don't have smart meters in this state. Smart meters being meters that tell the utilities what is the consumption at any given moment. And we don't really have anything really serious about having off-peak rates. And one of the approaches to global climate change, namely EVs, would be wonderful with the normal lifestyle of human beings in New Jersey, which is we normally work 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 8 to 7, whatever. And then when we come home, if you would plug in your EV, you would be using electricity pretty much at off-peak times. But the rates, what ACE is saying is they want to have a rate schedule that encourages off-peak use. There are actually towns that have deals with utilities for them to keep on their park lights and their tennis court lights and whatever overnight, because the utility needs to smooth out the curve. They need to smooth out the consumption curve in order for their systems to work efficiently and effectively. So there's a lot to be said for setting up a schedule related to time, but it's going to need a little more infrastructure, I think, to get it right. But it would, I think that's part of the thing that makes EVs such a great deal. You're going to get the same distance for half the price. That's a great deal, and no emissions.
Finally, someone asked what your position is on keeping nuclear power as an important part of New Jersey's energy portfolio.
I have to say I'm in favor of it. I'm the co-prime sponsor with Senator Sweeney for the nuclear subsidy. So if you want to send me hate mail over that, you're welcome to. But it wasn't about I love energy generators or I love one over another. It was about the impact on the environment. You know, nuclear power has allowed itself to be portrayed as an evil industry. All right. And by the way, some engineers should be hung by their petards for the way in which they designed Fukushima. You know, I mean, what IQ did that? But the truth of the matter is that most of them in the world have worked very well. If you go to France, they have 58 operating plants, never an accident. They're building their national nuclear waste depository, and they have energy that costs 70% of what it costs here. All right. And no carbon dioxide. And also, too, there's new technology in the nuclear world where they have much smaller plants, which probably could be sited more easily and distributed over, you know, in different places on the grid. So I don't think you can take nuclear out of the equation. I think you got to continue to look at it. And if our national government would ever get off its tuchus and designate a national nuclear waste depository, a repository, we would be just so much better off.
Okay, well, that brings us right to 2:29. So it looks like we can end this very timely with that last question. Thank you very much, Senator Smith. It's
Thank you
been
for your invitation.
a terrific hour with you.
Senator, thank you so much. And Bruce, thank you. You did a great job moderating the conversation. Senator, you know, just because you brought it up at the beginning, I was not going to say, but you're right. I've been back at the chamber now since 2014. I think I've asked you every year to join us. So this is one of the perks of COVID is
Right.
we are able to actually get together and have you in front of our membership and have you in front of this committee. And we really appreciate you taking time. And I will just put it on your radar now that you may be getting another invitation for early next year to do this one more time. And because it's a great way to go about getting the information straight from you and not having you have to drive to South Jersey. So
Right, and let me thank you once again for the Chamber of Commerce of Southern New Jersey being part of the process. You guys and gals are never reluctant to get your views in to the committee, and we don't always agree, but we
Sure.
appreciate what you have to say.
and all of those thanks and kudos go to Bruce Ketcher and his team at Manco Goldketcher and Fox, who helps the chamber and has helped the chamber for many years. Make sure that we are articulating the positions of our membership effectively to you and to the committee. So again, thank you. To everyone who joined us online today, I just threw in the chat the link to our final Environment Committee of the Year. We are going to have Sean Moriarty and Olivia Glenn from DEP coming in to talk about environmental justice and where we're at on the EJ stakeholder process. So you're not going to want to miss it. Please register if you have yet to do so. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you again online soon. Senator, again, thank you. Bruce, again, thank you. And job well done to you both. We'll see you online soon. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.